Well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me here today. As Max said, my name is Tom Hayton. I'm a creative director and consultant. And essentially what I do is I help companies to navigate complexity and then to explain what they're doing to the rest of the world. So I'm going to give you some of my experience and insights, and then later on we're going to tie that in with things that you have all been doing. And then at the very end, you'll have an opportunity to ask me questions, and I'll do my very best to answer them for you. Okay. So the title of my talk is How Lean is Lean. And if you're not sure what that means just yet, don't worry, everything will become clear. Okay, so here we go. So, first of all, I would like everybody to take a jump back in time, back to the earliest part of your lives, back to childhood. I want you to go back in time to when you were all at school. Hopefully you can all remember that. Okay, like everybody in the room, to close your eyes. Close your eyes. Cast your mind back to when you were very, very young. Cast your mind back. I can see you if you're not closing your eyes. Cast your mind back to when you were 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, when you were at school, sitting in class with your friends, with your favorite teacher, learning lots of new things about maths, about geography, history, science, about the world, and getting all this exciting new knowledge. Okay, I'd like to open your eyes again. Okay. I'd like you to talk to your seat partner, to the person who's sitting next to you. I would like you to just spend a few seconds telling your seat partner about your favorite teacher at school. What were they like? What did you like about them? What did they teach you? Off you go. Just a few seconds.
Yeah, like 4 years.
Okay, so however, if you haven't done so already, if you haven't told your partner about your teacher, now's your time. Okay, let's stop there.
So he tries to understand you.
Okay. So apparently you quite enjoyed that trip back in time. Let me ask you a question. Why did you go to school?
Ask my
It was not my teacher, it was my parents.
Okay, one at a time. What about you on the front there? Why did you go to school?
I wanted to learn something.
Why?
Why? Because I have to earn money in the future.
Why?
Huh?
Why?
Why I have to I have to live.
Why?
Because I'm a human. I need a dream.
Because you're a human. Okay, so what you're saying basically, ultimately is that the reason why you went to school is because you're a human being. So there's something fundamental and human about education and learning. Would you all agree with this, more or less? This is why human beings go to school. Does anyone think that going to school is a complete and utter waste of time in every circumstance? No. Would any of you want your children not to go to school?
No.
No.
Unless,
I need some free
unless I need this, I don't need it.
Okay, interesting perspective. Thank you. All right. So I asked you lots of why questions there. If you're wondering why I asked you so many why questions, I'm going to come back to this a little bit later on. So keep that in mind. Moving on. I'm going to change location now. We're going to go a few thousand miles away to Syria. I'm going to tell you a story about Syria. It's a story you probably already know. There's a war going on in Syria. It's been going on for quite a long time now, about 8 years. And it has completely destroyed the country. And it has completely destroyed the education system. So that means that tens of thousands of educational professionals, teachers, have either been killed, seriously injured, or forced to leave the country. So what does that mean? That means that millions of Syrian children have either not been to school at all, or if they have, their education experience has been severely disrupted. And so we're faced with potentially an entire lost generation in this country that used to have a very, very good education system. So this is a very serious situation, and it's a really tragic problem that is being faced by this country. And when the war eventually ends, and hopefully it will end quite soon, the issue of education is something that is going to have to be dealt with in on a very large scale and in a very thorough way. So this is a problem that I feel that is very close to my heart, because in my own way I have tried to address this problem. So let me tell you a little bit about what I've been doing. I have been working on a project to help to address the gaps in the Syrian education system, specifically to help Syrian teachers to continue to deliver education to Syrian children in whatever way they can. And I was hired by a couple of charities, one large educational organisation and another charity that has been working on the ground in Syria to help Syrian people with education, healthcare and so on, to try to devise a solution that can help Syrian teachers to continue with their own professional development so that they can continue to deliver good classes to Syrian children. And as you can imagine, the ideal situation will be that we could build an amazing school. This is Harvard, by the way, in case you're not familiar. The ideal situation would be we could build an amazing school with amazing facilities, with amazing teachers, and that everybody could go there, they could receive fantastic training, and they could go out into the world and help Syrian children. Unfortunately, the reality on the ground is that we can't do this, and in many Syrian cities you're looking at a situation like this. A lot of Syrian teachers are now living in refugee camps, or they've otherwise been forced to run away from their towns, villages and cities. In many cases, the most advanced piece of technology that they have is a mobile phone, which might not be a very advanced mobile phone. And there's not very much money for solving problems like this, unfortunately. Most NGOs have very, very limited budgets. So the challenge was, what can we do with very, very limited resources, very, very limited time, and this chaos that we're facing on the ground in this war zone. So what we did was we started with a hypothesis, a theory. Our theory was that we could reach lots and lots of Syrian teachers through their smartphones. because we knew that pretty much all Syrian teachers have a phone. So that was a reasonable starting point. And we thought maybe we could teach them English through their smartphones. And maybe we could put together a bunch of free tools that already exist in a unique way to deliver unique value in this unique situation. And along the way, gather some data to validate our hypothesis and then hopefully improve the model as we went. You notice I've used the term MVP here. Does anyone know what that stands for? Yep.
Minimum visible product?
Almost. MVP
Viable.
stands for minimum viable product. It's a piece of jargon that you come up against quite a lot in so-called lean methodology and agile project management and so on. An MVP is basically the simplest possible product you can build that actually delivers some kind of value to your customers. Okay? The clue's in the title. Okay, so basically what we did, I'll give you a more detailed map of it now. What did this look like? So I've already explained the hypothesis. Our MVP consisted of an e-learning platform, so an educational learning platform that was delivered via their mobile phones. And we took one that already existed because it had already been built by the educational organization that I was working with. We just adapted it a little bit. We tweaked it a little bit so that it would work in Syria. But it didn't require writing any new software. It didn't require lots of development costs. It didn't require a lot of time. We just tried to readapt it to a new situation. In addition to that, because we thought, well, it's better if people can learn with a real human being teacher, but we can't actually put them on the ground in Syria because it's too complicated and too dangerous. Maybe we could use video calls. And there's a bunch of free tools for video calling, things like Zoom, WhatsApp, Skype, and so on and so forth. Maybe we could train our teachers using teachers sitting in a country nearby. Let's give it a whirl. We also need a way of verifying whether these classes are actually having some impact. Ideally, what we would do is we would give everybody a test or an exam, but we can't do that if we're working in a war zone and everybody's having to run away and it's just too complicated, too dangerous, and too expensive. So we invented a new testing system, again, borrowing ideas from existing tests that were already validated, and then we got the real living, breathing human teachers to do them via video call. I'm simplifying this quite a lot, but hopefully you get the basic idea. Once we've done that, we got feedback from our users. That was in the form of conversations that we were having with them via instant messaging and chat. And we also gave them some surveys. How's everything going? Are you actually learning stuff? And then we also got other results in terms of how they performed on the improvised tests. And we also measured their attendance both online on the e-learning platform and in the video calls that we were doing. So all of this produced data which enabled us to revise our hypothesis and then improve the service that we were delivering to these people. And this process was going on all the time. Constantly revising, constantly asking ourselves questions, constantly having to come up with improvised solutions in a very low-cost, dynamic situation. Is everyone with me so far? Yeah? Okay. You can ask questions later if anything isn't clear. Okay. So this comes back to what I asked you earlier. Remember I kept asking you why. This technique is often called the 5 whys. The clue's in the title. The idea of the 5 whys is that it forces you to ask why you are doing what you are doing. Why do you believe what you believe? Why do you think that your hypothesis that's driving your product development is correct? What evidence do you have? What data do you have? What information do you have from your customers and where has it come from? When you keep asking why, eventually you hit some kind of foundation. You hit some kind of fundamental truth. So in your case, that was we're human beings. There's something fundamentally important about education. It's part of what makes us human, this desire to learn and this desire to improve ourselves. This is a useful, free technique that everybody can use in any situation, whether they're developing an e-learning situation in a war zone or whether they want to design a new sewing machine. Ask yourself why you're doing it, and ask yourself why. What is the why behind the why? And what's the why behind that why? How do you justify your beliefs, and what data are you using to back them up? Okay, so here are a few little insights, or a few little key points regarding our approach. Firstly, we kept our users' interests first. Who were our users in this case? The teachers that we were trying to help. Yeah, exactly. But not just them. The users were also our teacher trainers. So the people that were delivering the video courses, they were also users. They were at a, if you like, a higher level in the system, but they were also using the methodology that we were developing. And the other level was the end users, the end beneficiaries, which is the children who are ultimately benefiting from this program. Now, unfortunately, we don't have that much data yet about how they have benefited, but they were always at the forefront of our minds because they were ultimately the people who we want to help. We responded and adapted to their feedback. As I said, we had several different channels open for them to give us feedback. We were constantly revising our approach. So we were revising on the go, on the fly, during the project, not waiting many months until it had been completed before we tweaked our approach. We kept things minimal, but viable. This is an important distinction. Sometimes you can't go any more minimal. So we tried to strike that balance as we were going. And very, very importantly, safety first. We were operating in a war zone. It was very important to us that we never did anything that might have put anybody in a position of risk. What we didn't do, this is equally important. We didn't fear ambiguity. Why is this important? Well, we're operating in a very fast-moving, dynamic situation where there was no rule book and there was no roadmap. Something like this, to the best of my knowledge, has never been done before. So we had to kind of make it up as we were going along. Now, that can be very intimidating if you're not sure what to do because nobody has done it previously, then sometimes that can make you fearful of moving forward. But we knew that we had to do something. We knew that there was a sense of urgency, and so we had to try to find a way to navigate that ambiguity, and constantly gathering feedback and gathering data was important in that process. We didn't wait until we were ready, because if we waited until we were ready, the war would have been over by the time we launched. And we didn't wait until we felt comfortable. This situation, by definition, is uncomfortable, so we just had to learn to deal with it. We didn't develop bespoke software because it would have taken too long and it would have cost too much money. And we certainly didn't have a long development cycle. As I said, when I was explaining the diagram, we used tools that already existed, we just put them together in a unique way. In terms of customer engagement, there are a few ways that we did this. Instant messaging was one, email was another, although, to be honest, we didn't really end up using email that much because the feedback cycle was too slow. Some people would use emails, some people didn't. We found that instant messaging was much better. It's also more secure, generally speaking. So, yeah, this was much more important than this. It was 24/7 in the sense that it was possible for our users to interact with somebody on the project at any time. They might not get an instant response, but the door was open throughout the life cycle of the project. And then at the end, we brought in external consultants to do a review of how things had gone so that we got a fresh perspective. I was an external consultant, but I was in the project, so we brought someone else who wasn't in the project to bring, again, a fresh perspective on the whole thing. Key point, you must speak their language. This has two meanings in the context of this project. The most obvious one was that the first language of our beneficiaries was Arabic. Arabic. So we did not expect for our users to be able to articulate their feedback in English because many of them didn't speak English very well. So we made it as easy as possible for them, as frictionless as possible for them by doing surveys in Arabic, by having people who could communicate with them in Arabic whenever necessary. The second meaning of this, which applies to any situation, is that you've got to understand who your customers are. How old are your customers? What demographic do they belong to? What are their interests? What are their hopes, fears, dreams, beliefs, attitudes, experience, and so on and so forth? That applies across any industry in any situation. So you've got to speak their language, and you've also got to speak their language. Connecting the dots. So let's bring this full circle back to all of you. The methodology behind this is often referred to as lean methodology. And this was popularized by Eric Ries, who's the author of the famous book, The Lean Startup. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend that you do read it. And basically, the idea behind this methodology is that first you learn, so you get to understand who your customers are and what sort of things they want. Then you build something. You build an MVP. You build a minimum viable product. You build something simple and quick and easy so that you can then measure how well you're meeting the needs of your customers. Why simple? Why quick? Why this sort of dynamic approach? Well, because it's very common for people to get a big idea in their head about what they want to build and why they want to build it, and they spend loads of time and millions of euros building it, and then they launch it, and they find that nobody wants it, or that it doesn't work, or it doesn't work in the way that they intended. So the idea of the minimum viable product is that you build something that is designed to get useful, usable information, which can then help you learn something so that you can then build a second MVP so that you can then test it again with your users so that you can then learn more so that you can then revise until eventually you've got a product that you can actually deliver to a more open market. Okay? So, how does this apply in a corporate environment? Well, very often it doesn't, is the simple answer. There are challenges when you're working within a large organization, when you try to apply this kind of methodology. Here are a few based on my own experience. Too much money. Sounds a bit crazy, doesn't it, to say you've got too much money? Why is that a problem? Any idea? Why would having too much money be a problem?
Solutions.
You can do whatever you want. When you can do whatever you want, it doesn't focus the mind. When you have very limited resources, by definition, you have to prioritize. The same applies to time, and the same applies to resources. So if you're dealing with an emergency situation, for example, you'll focus on the most important thing, because you've got to deal with the thing that's most pressing. If you've got infinite money, infinite time, and infinite resources, what's forcing you to focus on anything? It can be quite challenging. Second thing, detachment from the customer base. How many layers are there between you and your customer? If you're in a very large organization, there might be hundreds of layers. History. If you're working for a very old organization, as some people in this room might be, you have certain established ways of doing things, which is great. It's a wonderful thing to have traditions and history behind you, to have all of those generations of experience. But sometimes it can also be a barrier to innovation. Sometimes, not always. Not enough skin in the game. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that if you are personally invested in something, it makes it more likely that you're going to focus on its solution. So for Example, if you're running a very small startup and you've only got 10,000 euros and all of your co-founders have families to feed and that money is ticking down every day, you have a lot of skin in the game. But if you've got a very secure job in a massive corporate environment, a large salary, and you know your position is very secure, maybe you don't have that much skin in the game. So maybe you're not as highly motivated to iterate on the product development. Low appetite for risk. Speaks for itself. Politics and bureaucracy. I don't think I need to explain that one. And this is another thing that I've been thinking about quite a lot recently. Lean is very trendy at the moment. You've probably heard it quite a lot. You've probably heard lots of people talking about lean methodology, agile, project management, all this sort of stuff. And I've come across lots of organizations that are trying to do lean, or they're labeling things as being lean, but they're not really that lean. So what I would like to challenge you to think about is how lean your lean really is. Is this guy lean?
Leaner than me. In what meaning?
In what meaning? He's lean compared to some. Certainly he's not in bad shape. What about this guy? Is he lean?
You want
or deep?
I think he's leaner than the other one.
He's leaner than the other guy. Yes, thank you. I was thinking that my metaphor was going to completely break down there. So thanks for rescuing me there. Okay, so how lean is lean? Well, what I would like you to challenge, I would like to issue you with a challenge. If you are given a project, 6 months to do it, ask yourself what you could do in 6 weeks. Then ask yourself what you could do in 6 days. Then ask yourself what you could do in 6 hours. So keep skinning it down and skinning it down and skinning it down and skinning it down. Reduce, 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 reduce. 6 million, 600K, 6,600, nothing. What would you do if you had nothing to spend on your new product? Or just $600? How would that change your approach? How would that affect your sense of urgency? How would it affect the tools that you use? You've got 6 problems to solve. Which one would you solve today, now? Which one's the most important? And if you've got to do it by next year, what would you do today? Thank you very much. Any questions?
Right here.
Yes, hello.
Who is the customer in terms of paying? So who paid for the project?
For the Syria project,
Yeah.
it's a good question. There were a few sources of funding for that project. Initially, there was an arts project that raised some money, and then it was funded by the British Council, which is one of the partner organisations. Mm-hmm.
When you talk about the first language, I was thinking about what was the tool that it was an existing tool, it was already in Arabian. Because you said, what was the first language? I was thinking, well, depends on what was the tool they began, or not.
Yeah, what I meant by that was what was their mother tongue. The mother tongue of the customers, yeah.
Does that mean, or you know Arabic and your tool is Arabic and so on?
Yeah.
If you are not Arabic, for me it was a surprise that you begin with Arabic.
My point there was that if we want to understand what their opinions are or what their concerns are, we wanted to speak to them in Arabic because it was just easier. With some of them, we could have spoken to them in English, but it would have been a much more difficult conversation, and they wouldn't have been able to express that same level of detail and nuance as if they spoke in.
Understandings are the same. Okay, so
Yeah. Well, now we understand each
now
other,
I-
so yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
What advice do you have to give when, like us, we're in a historical corporation We're lean in some areas and not so much in others. It's very difficult to convince the leadership to approach a project in such an entrepreneurial way. They expect the same outcome as the entrepreneur would get, but without the leeway. And so, in part, like for example, on the side, I'll prepare a proposal and just ask permission to try it, and thinking if there's one simple thing, one simple example, then they'll open the doors more. But it doesn't always work that way.
Okay. Okay. My suggestion would be to not ask permission and go ahead and do it anyway. And if that is going to create conflict, then figure out what you would be able to do without getting into trouble with very minimal resources. Even if you have to do it at the weekend. So you've then got evidence that you can bring back to your boss and say, hey, this is something that I've been working on in my spare time. It's related to this project we've been working on related to X. Here's what I've been able to come up with so far. Yes?
When you talk about the 5 whys, have you seen, so it's called the 5 whys obviously for a reason. Do people typically hit the rock bottom after 5 whys?
More or less. It might take 4, it might be 7. Yeah. The point is that you ask why like a child.
Yeah.
So you don't, as an adult, we tend to bring a lot of assumptions to the table. And when you keep asking why, like a 3-year-old kid, it forces you to challenge those adult assumptions and think about things in a new way. So whether it's 5 whys or 17 whys, it doesn't really matter. The point is that you just ask why more than you normally would.
My 6-year-old could probably get to 50 whys.
Perfect.
Let's talk to him tomorrow.
Yeah, why not? Anything else?
How did you define your success?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. Well, as I said, we surveyed our users and we asked them what they thought of the experience of doing this course. And more than 95% of them came back and said that it had given them a sense of hope, that it was a worthwhile thing for them to do, and that people actually cared about them outside of Syria. And that was, for me personally, that was the biggest success. Because in the beginning we were just thinking in terms of improving their English level. So the goal was that after 6 months, they would move up 1 level on the Common European Framework for language assessment. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, you know, the A1, A2, B1, B2. Yes, the goal was they move up 1. And we measure that by testing their English. How was it at the beginning and how was it at the end? So that was the obvious success metric. But actually, the one that was more meaningful for me personally, and I think for the beneficiaries, was that it made them feel better. So they were in a situation of horrible torment. Many of them had lost family members and been forced to flee, and they were unemployed and not sure if they even had a future, but they had a sense of hope. And that, I think, was the greatest success metric of this project. So that's another important point. It's not just about the quantitative metrics, but also sometimes the qualitative metrics. How does it make the users feel? In this context, it was actually really quite poignant and heartwarming.
Thank you very much for that inspiring story and for all the experiences you've shared with us.
My pleasure.
It's this week is about business, yes, but it's also about thinking outside of the box and also understanding that some of those big words are very helpful, especially in management or lean startup or lean strategies, even under the most extreme circumstances. And that is something I wanted to show you. If you can actually use these ideas, right, to solve such complex, urgent, and complicated issues, it should be more than easy for us to actually find good solutions for the problems we're facing here, right, for our customers. And it's also a bit of perspective to understand, that the things we learn here and the things you showed us, it's a lot about mindset, it's a lot about a culture. The question you asked, so for example, how do I proceed if, I don't get any further in my company? You're like, just do it, right? It's a fundamentally different sometimes in the way we were actually brought up and we were taught to act within a company. And so we want to give you the chance in this week to actually act these things out in a relatively safe environment with us. So please take that chance, and now please give Tom a big, big hand for his time. And
Thanks for listening. And if you have any follow-up questions, do feel to drop me a line. Thank you.